What's up, guys? Welcome in. Kind of after I feel like we had a bye week, but we are back and hopefully better than ever. The day before, I feel like the biggest game of the year every year. For me personally, somebody that grew up in Georgia, but we'll get to that here shortly. Welcome into All Tied Up. I am your co-host, Chris Marler, joined by my good buddy and also co-host, Clint Lamb. Clint, I brought this up before we started recording. You already know how this is partially going to go. Our viewers don't, but you do, because we have been doing this, and I have forced you to do this as my friend for the last several years, which is it is the day before the Georgia game. I need you to talk me off the ledge, and I need you to talk me into how we're winning this game. So,
how many
how
times
you doing,
do you think,
bud?
how many times do you think you've asked me to do this, Chris?
We got sat next to each other at the 2021 Miami-Bama game. The content and topics that day were a little bit different about football than it was mainly about, I think, a breakup and me trying to steal 4 to 5 Chick-fil-A sandwiches from the press room.
No. You didn't try. You did.
Then it's happened multiple times a year. And honestly, it's like it would probably happen in most games, most big games, but this is the only one that ever comes up where it's like there's a concern you might not win.
I just want to point out when it comes to Georgia, however many times I've had to do it, I've only been wrong once. Want to put that out there. So when I talk you off this ledge, we got a pretty good track record going. Doesn't mean that that's going to happen on Saturday, but I can understand from like a motivational standpoint. Like I do feel like based off of what happened last year, revenge game, Kirby Smart, the fact that the defensive front, the defensive line for Georgia kind of got pushed around a little bit. You think they're probably going to be a little bit extra motivated, so from those types of things, I can see where there would be some concern. It's like a Kirby Smart motivated team. It kind of felt like a slighted Nick Saban Alabama team, where they were kind of pissed off, ready to, get their revenge, I guess you call it. But outside of that, what has you the most concerned about this game?
Well, because I hate Georgia fans collectively. Like I don't want to deal
off
with
the field
fans.
thing, not really an on the field thing.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with the actual game. Well, I mean, we can get into that. I do want to touch on one thing because I want our audience to get a peek behind the curtain as to who I am. And a lot of you probably aren't going to like some of the things that I say because I've done my deep dive. I've got all these numbers and all that kind of stuff. But you said this has become like our process, right? Like this is like almost like a tradition every time these two play. And you have been right, I think, every time except for once, right? So I'm going to play my part. And every single time that I have picked us to lose to this team, the opposite has happened. I know what my job is. I know what my role is. And I'm not messing with a consistent thing that has brought me joy over the last 3 years. So I'm warning everyone. I am going to pick a certain way based off of purely emotional hedging and good luck. But we'll get into actually breaking down the game. What worries me the most about them is I keep coming back to this. 2 really evenly matched teams. You brought up like pushing their defensive line around last year. Same thing happened in 2021 against an even better defense. That was a season where Bama gave up, I think it was 41 total sacks, and they didn't have a single one that day. The one guy who feel like he played his career best and every time they played Georgia was Seth McLaughlin. But I'm not worried about the offensive line as much. I'm not worried about that matchup. I'm not really worried about their front 7. What I can't get out of my head is the amount of receivers from opposing teams through 3 games that have been running free behind our defense. And it hasn't really mattered as much because they haven't had a quarterback that can accurately get them the ball downfield at USF and Western Kentucky. But Georgia does have that guy. So if you find yourself in a situation where you have Arian Smith running free behind the defense, which he tends to do, that's concerning.
I can see where that would be concerning. I mean, you say that about Carson Beck. I think he's capable. I don't think but he really hadn't been a huge vertical passer. It's been kind of like the polar opposite of Jalen Milroe. Like he lives in the short to intermediate, the pre-snap, post-snap, going through his progressions. He does a lot of that stuff extremely well. Can manage the game extremely well. Not going to call him a game manager because people will take that negatively, but he manages the game extremely well. So, I don't want anybody to get confused. If there's a guy streaking wide open down the field, Carson Beck's got the ability to hit him. So that can't happen. I wouldn't be shocked if it did happen once, just because the fact that Georgia really hasn't been a vertical passing team. They're effective as far as their outside run, and I want to, highlight a lot of their success running the football has been outside 67% of the time. They're good at the short to intermediate game, but what Alabama's going to be focusing on are those two things that might present some opportunities as far as the vertical stuff. It's just a matter of if they're going to be able to hit it. But I mean, what have you thought about Carson Beck this year compared to last? Because I mean, you lose Brock Bowers, you lose Ladd McConkey. Those felt like two very trusted options. Last year, when he didn't have one or both of those guys available, I think he was in a really good groove and a really good rhythm. They weren't always as effective, but I feel like he managed not having those guys a little bit better. Now that it's kind of a permanent thing, he's got a relationship, some rapport with Dominic Lovett. Arian Smith, obviously London Humphreys is not going to be playing in this game. He had that 40-yard touchdown against Vanderbilt, he was a transfer from Vanderbilt against Clemson in week 1. But just it feels like maybe they haven't been as dynamic of a passing team. Obviously, when you lose talents, 2 first-round talents and McConkey and Bowers, that's going to play a part. But what have you thought about Carson Beck this year compared to last year?
So it's early, but like one of the things I think that, like I thought he was great against Clemson, but Georgia is so unique in comparison to every other elite college football team and college football playoff and national championship contending team, because especially in this day and age, we see teams like Ohio State, we see teams like Bama, we see teams like Oregon, Texas. Like a lot of those teams score, they score in bunches and they score early. Like you look at like when Clemson was at their peak, Ohio State's been like this forever under Ryan Day. Bama's been really good about this. You get on the board and you get up on your opponent early and you bury them, right? Like getting on the board first it has been a staple, I think, for a lot of those programs. Georgia hasn't been like that. Like Georgia, especially the last year and a half under Bobo, they've been very slow starting. And I think you have to give them credit because of the halftime adjustments they're able to make and the confidence they have doing that. Like you saw it against Kentucky. You saw it last year against South Carolina when they were trailing at the half. Not a lot of panic or worry that sets in. But if they get into a situation like that against Bama, and Bama has I think it's like hold on, let me look at the numbers here because I got it written down in pencil, of course. Bama is 9th in the country in first half points per game at 25.7 points. And also does it in both, right? Like they're top 10 in the country in first half points per game, second half points per game, and first half points per game allowed. So Georgia can't really afford a slow start, in my opinion. The thing that has been the biggest difference to me with Carson Beck is I thought he was fine against Clemson, right? That I thought he was fine. Against Kentucky, the thing that Georgia's done better than every other team and program in the country over the last 3 years, especially when they had Monken, was distributing the football to like multiple guys, like all over the field. I remember looking at this in 2021 when Bama was like riddled with injuries, and you saw from like midway through November on, you didn't have a game where we had more than 6 guys with a catch. Georgia was averaging, I think, around like 8.5 to 9 different players every single game, including the playoffs. That's when you had Brock Bowers and all those guys. 9 different guys getting a catch per game. Like they spread the football around a lot. They're not really doing that right now. And I don't know if it's because they don't know who to go to, but when you see a Georgia box score where one guy has 6 catches and the rest of them have 1 for a couple of yards, like that is very uncharacteristic of their team.
I think that's pretty good evaluation. It does feel like that this team it feels different. Last year they got down to Alabama at 2 different points by 10 points. So double digits, but when's the last time we saw a Georgia team down to a point where they have to get out of their game plan, get out of their comfort zone, kind of work their way back? I mean, does anything stand out to you as far as whether it be late game they're down by more than one score, or maybe it's, a couple of touchdowns. I think once you start getting to like 2 touchdowns, the pressure starts, building or mounting. 10 points, a field goal and a touchdown, there's a little bit of pressure, but you can still kind of be you, especially when you got a lot of time left. I mean, I can't really recall in recent years where they've been down a significant amount.
So the Mizzou game a couple years ago, 2022, they were down by double digits, I feel like, for a lot of that game. I remember in the first half specifically because I kept hammering Georgia to cover the first half spread and the full game spread and lost a lot of money on that. But I think that's also different because it's a regular season game that doesn't have as much on the line. The one that stands out the most is probably that Peach Bowl against Ohio State when they were down, I think, 13 in the fourth quarter. But that's also, I don't know if that took them out of their game plan. Like they started hitting big plays in the passing game, and if you watch that team all year, that's exactly what they did. It was some guys like Arian Smith, and they didn't try to pound the football as much. But I think that I've said this for the last 3 years that these teams have played, and the key for Bama to win this game is to get Georgia in an unfamiliar situation that's also all too familiar. And what I mean by that is, like, they don't trail a lot late in games. Like they don't find themselves in positions where they are like on the brink of losing a lot. But so you have to get them in that kind of unfamiliar territory. In the very few times they have been in that situation, they've managed to come back and usually win those games, but not against Alabama. If this game goes into the fourth quarter and it's close, like Kirby has shown over and over, and this team has shown over and over, they are what my college baseball coach would have referred to as a mental midget, and they will not be able to get out of their own way, I think, to win that game. Like we have seen that in this game time and time again. So if you can get them to the fourth quarter where you're ahead and you let that seed of doubt start sinking in, you know what it'll do to the fan base. Like the fan base will be in just complete disarray. And we've seen it, over the past couple of years. Look at Carson last year, a team that had very few turnovers. They were fantastic protecting the football. Inside of his own 20, you get a mental lapse where you fumble inside, and that's the game. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the key for me is get this thing to the fourth quarter and don't have to play from behind. Like Bama doesn't need to be having to play out of their game plan and having to figure out a new identity halfway through the game where you're asking Milroe to throw the ball over 30 times or something.
And that's a good point. Like there's a flip side of that, and it definitely is making sure that Alabama's able to run their offense. If it becomes too reliant on, okay, they're not going to be running the football a ton at this point because they're down too much. If they get down by a couple of touchdowns and it's, midway through the third quarter or something, late in the third quarter, you might start seeing them press a little bit. I don't think that bodes well. That's where turnovers can happen. You're trying to force some things. Plus, Jalen Milroe is probably going to be himself. Can he go into straight drop back pass mode? Or is he going to be dropping back to pass? Maybe Georgia's applying pressure and he's taking off to run, but now a lot of clock's going when he's continuously taking off. So that's something that can happen. There's a lot of different ways or scenarios, how it could work out, but that's a really good point. Alabama's got to make sure that they are in this game within striking distance at the very least, pretty much at all times. You go down 7 immediately to Georgia last year. It was a scripted drive. I don't think enough people, give attention to that. But it did look like how easy it was and how balanced it was in the way that in which they scored. It was like, this is going to be a very long day for Alabama. And
2021. I remember we punted them deep. I think they were up 3-0 and we punted them to the 6-yard line. I remember sitting there to myself in Mercedes-Benz saying, all right, well, just don't give up a 94-yard drive. They go 8 plays, 94 yards, and then they capped it off with a wrinkle to their offense that they hadn't shown all year to touchdown to Darnell Washington. So I mean, that kind of stuff, it's I wouldn't be shocked if Georgia goes up first or they score first because they have the talent to do that. Yeah, but they just haven't done that. Like in the last year and a half, they just don't do that.
Well, and that's dangerous. If you really get Alabama's crowd involved, you go to Mercedes-Benz and you do some of these things, that's a little bit different. It's at best for Alabama, it's a little neutral, but I mean, pretty much at all times it's going to be leaning Georgia. So you go into Bryant-Denny Stadium, you start slow, Alabama starts hot, they get an early touchdown or something, crowd really starts getting involved. Things become really difficult for your offense. And now you're kind of in a reactive mindset, and it's just that's not the situation you want to find yourself in.
No.
So yeah, I'm with you on that front too. I mean, but some players, maybe who do you want to see have a good game, or maybe who do you think's going to have a good game? It could be a want, or you see something and you think that it works out well for one particular player. That can be offense or defense.
So I want to see Domani Jackson and all the freshman defensive backs have a good game. Before I even answer the question, let me be as long-winded as I always am. Have you looked at any of the player props for this game?
No, that's why we're getting you in here, big dog.
Yeah.
You're my player props guy. I got
you. It is shocking the numbers that Vegas is putting out for receivers on both sides. I was looking at this
high or low.
Low. Like before I looked into it, I'll pull it up real quick too. Before I looked into it, I usually have like an idea of what I think I want to bet on, or what I would like, I think is a good play or whatever, if it's going to be like a picks article or anything like that. I was looking at this yesterday and I kept thinking like what I told you when we started the show, which was players running free behind our defense, and that resulting in something bad. By the way, the line has moved significantly
to
since
-1.
last night.
To -1, right?
Bama is favored by 1.
Really?
It was 2.5 last night when I looked at it. So
Bama's now the favorite. Now Georgia's the underdog.
Dude, 3.5 point swing overnight is pretty substantial.
Yeah.
But here's what I keep looking at.
Wow.
And the over went up. The total went up by 1 point to 49.5. So let me walk you through this. Like rushing props. Jalen Milroe, his is at 42 yards. I think that's fair. I wouldn't bet on that at all, right?
I mean, obviously rushing, yeah.
Yeah. Jam Miller, 50 is where they have his number at. Justice Haynes, 38.
It's money.
Trevor Etienne is at 71. That's okay. Now receiving, because one of these, Clint, is going to shock you. Like one of the people I say is going to absolutely shock you based on what he's done so far. Now Arian Smith, his number is at 40. I think he's going to get that in one play on Saturday at some point. I really do. He's too explosive. Colby Young is at 25. Dylan Bell, this is a good bet, is at 37. And then Dominic Lovett, who's been their go-to guy, is at 50. Now for Bama, Jeremy Bernard, 43. Kobe Prentice, 21. Ryan Williams, 48.
Now, what do you think's the you think that's like a Kirby Smart 17-year-old? Well, that sounds bad. More of just the youth of Ryan Williams, and the fact that against a Georgia caliber opponent, first time we've ever seen him face anybody remotely close to this good. Is Vegas kind of slow playing it? Do you think that could be what's causing that? Feels low to me. I mean, does it feel low? I'm guessing it feels low to you.
Dude, look, his production so far in games, like you just look at like what he's done in 3 games. I know I looked it up last night and I should have wrote it down like I always do, but I don't think he's had under like 80 yards like in any game. He's got 10 catches for 285 yards and 4 touchdowns on the season. I know he's had over 100. He's gone over 100 twice. I don't know the history of what Bama receivers have done in this matchup necessarily. I know J-Mo and Mechie torched them.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, yeah.
um, I, I don't remember what happened last year specifically. I think it was we got a lot of people involved last year. Jam Miller coming out of the backfield. And listen,
Very, very few plays downfield, like the Isaiah Bond, where it was it a
yeah,
catch, wasn't it a catch? I mean, so yeah, I want to say it was pretty limited last year.
but Kirby also still hasn't shown that he can stop a wheel route. So I think that Jam Miller might be involved still in the passing game. But the thing with Ryan Williams is, I think the secret seems like it's out about him nationally that he is a very, very good talent. But like, how are you gonna shut him down? Because with this offense, sure, if he doesn't get his yards, then I'm hammering Kobe Prentice and I'm hammering Jeremy Bernard. Honestly, the guy I think is going to have a breakout game in this game is Kendrick Law. And I think you're going to start seeing him be involved in not just the passing game, but I think they're going to get him involved in screens. And I think they're going to get him involved in end arounds and like those pop passes and stuff, and utilize his athleticism. But there is no way that you're going to hold all three of those receivers under 50 yards. That's just not how a Kalen DeBoer offense works. And it feels like a pretty big oversight.
Well, it's projected to be a low scoring game, right? What's the over under, like 48?
It went up to 49.5 last night.
Okay, so it's climbing, which is and a guy like how has Ryan Williams got his yardage? By far has been explosive plays downfield. So if you're looking at Williams and you're saying, Alabama's offense versus Georgia's defense, I think Georgia's defense is really good. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to limit. That's one of their main priorities is limiting the explosives. I really don't think that you stop the explosives. Right. But if you do limit them, and a lot of Ron Williams' yardage has come through explosives, then unless he's one of those few guys that breaks through and gets one, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he ends up with 3 catches for 20 yards. They were doing some stuff against Wisconsin to try to get him the football more, let him create some yardage after the catch. It just really wasn't working out, extremely well. I think that will continue to come with time. And I think that Alabama's perimeter blocking with their receivers is really good. So
very good.
For one reason or another, I just don't think that it worked out there, but it certainly could work out in this game or in the future. So that's a really interesting way of looking at it. What did you say Jeremy Bernard's was?
43.
I think that's the one for me personally.
I agree.
I think that if they do give Ron Williams some added attention, they try to limit him. Jalen Milroe is going to get yardage from somewhere. I'm not saying he's going to throw for 300 or anything like that, but he's going to get his yardage somewhere. And it feels like a pivot to Jeremy Bernard, who is kind of he's played in some really big games at Washington. He's a trusted option. He's getting better chemistry with Jalen Milroe. I feel like he's one of those guys where, last year, and I could be wrong on this, but I want to say did they start to feed Jermaine Burton in this game? I know that he had the touchdown catch, but I don't know what all he did outside of that.
I mean, they did. They targeted him a lot. Isaiah Bond was huge in this game as well, but like Burton had moments before, like that A&M game was it's just like it was the perfect example of who he was as a person and like in general, not even just a football player, just as a person, and how it was to cheer for him or cheer for a team that had him on it. Because man, he had I think it was 10 catches for 185 yards in that game and 2 touchdowns, and like one was, I think he scored both touchdowns in the second half to put Bama up for good. He also fumbled on a play. Just anyway, but I'm with you on Jeremy Bernard. I think the other one that I want to see personally have a good day is Justice Haynes, and I don't know how much room you're going to have or how much success you're going to be able to have running the football against Georgia. Like, not saying that they won't be able to. I'm just saying I don't know how much they're going to be able to have, because that's been a staple of Kirby Smart teams and how good they are up front in the front seven. And a lot of teams struggle to run the football against them. But that's one of the reasons I'm so high on all those receiver player props, is because I feel like they're going to struggle. If they're going to struggle, it'll be in the run game. But dude, like this is not just all right, we're gonna go line up man to man like a 7-on-7 drill and see if you can go shut down Ryan Williams, Andrew Claw, Kobe Prentice, and Jeremy Bernard. Like Kalen DeBoer will scheme people open. Like and I think it'll happen a lot. I don't know if there's going to be a go-to guy. Like
That's what I'm worried about now that the more I think about it.
I mean, but I do think that like if they're keyed in on Ryan Williams, that doesn't make me feel like, oh, if Ryan Williams doesn't have a over 50 yards receiving like the prop says, that doesn't make me feel like, well, if he doesn't do that, Bama's not going to win. It makes me feel like if he doesn't get that, that means someone else or multiple other people are going to go off and have a huge day.
Well, what's interesting is, I mean, last year's game, Jalen Milroe 13 of 23, so not great from a completion percentage standpoint, but 192 yards, not terrible. In fact, I would probably say 190, 200 yards passing going into this game feels about right. I mean, that's what he's been averaging this year. Mm-hmm. You might need a little bit more from him, but he averaged 8.3 yards per attempt. Obviously, in a lot of games last year, he was averaging 10 plus, so that was lower, but 8.3 still really respectable. 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, but out of 192 yards passing, leading receiver was Isaiah Bond with 79 on 5 catches. Outside of that, the leader was Jam Miller and Jermaine Burton with 28 yards. So a lot of spreading it out last year. And so that's as I was looking at those numbers, I'm like, man, I could see this can become one of those games. And I've mentioned this before. Kirby Smart is in that line of the Nick Sabans and the Bill Belichick's of the world, where they will take away your primary option for wanting to win. What is that?
No, I was saying make you play left-handed.
Oh, I would have never guessed what you were doing, and if you'd have given me 50,000 chances, I thought you might have been trying to do the Star Trek thing. I didn't know. Anyways, but I don't think Kirby's to the same degree as Saban or Belichick on that front. But that's kind of they make you beat them in other ways. How you're going to want to win. They really do a good job of taking that away from you. And in last year's game, they're how Alabama had kind of started to win was Jalen Milroe was really starting to get things going with his legs. And so they thought, hey, we're going to be super creative. We're going to do 2 quarterback spies. Who does that? That was kind of weird. But that was their goal is, hey, let's make Jalen Milroe beat us from within the pocket. Anytime he escapes, we want to apply immediate pressure with a spy. Problem is, you split the field into 2 sides for those guys, which was good because, Milroe can outrun guys to the sidelines pretty easily. But, it felt like Alabama just started taking whatever they could get, distributing the football to a lot of different guys, taking what the defense was given on any given play. And so maybe that ends up creating a situation where, it's similar. But we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. Let's flip to the other side. What else you got, Chris?
Well, I do want to say one more thing, and I know that for whatever reason, I don't know if he's a Bama quarterback or if it's just like if it's something else. But Jalen Milroe seems to be one of the most polarizing players in terms of like evaluation and getting like a fair evaluation from fans and like from his own fan base and others as well. And I don't know what that's about because everyone has an opinion on him and it's usually very, very drastic and I think a lot of times wrong. But if you have doubts about Jalen Milroe, or you talk about how he's not like, he's only a running back or whatever, he's not a good quarterback. I will point to this game more than anything else, more than the LSU game, more than the, that stretch in November where he had like 10 touchdowns in 2 weeks against LSU and Kentucky. When Georgia scored late in the 4th last year against Bama and pulled within 3, I think a lot of us were like wondering if the wheels were about to fall off. And what Tommy Rees and Nick Saban did was put the game and the ball in Jalen Milroe's hands against a team that was undefeated in 2 years, a team you were an underdog to, you had no business beating, all that kind of shit. And you put the game in his hands, and then you unveiled a new wrinkle to the offense that you hadn't shown all year. That's stuff that we haven't seen, I think, from Bama and OC since like the Sark and Kiffin days. And the first play of that drive, you have a designed run for Milroe using his strengths, and he gets a 20-yard run or something like that, and then ends up ultimately icing it with his legs as well. The one thing I am confident in this game offensively, that kid knows how to win. He has not lost to a team from the SEC that's been an SEC team at the time they played once in his career. And that kid is putting up historical numbers. And if I had to choose between him or Carson Beck, Carson Beck might be a phenomenal NFL quarterback. But Jalen effing Milroe is my quarterback. And I think he is going to have, I fully trust him with the ball in his hands on Saturday.
Well, I think what he really started doing well against these really quality opponents is as much as there wasn't going right, I think after the Texas game last year, in these big games, he started protecting the football pretty well. You saw it start to decrease. I thought he did a pretty good job going on the road to College Station against Texas A&M. He did have an interception, but I thought, against Kentucky, granted, Alabama ended up blowing them out, but he did have an interception. But for the most part, I mean, you're playing the Michigans, you're playing the Georgias, you're limiting the turnovers. And, I think that is really probably more than anything, the back-breaking interceptions or turnovers. You started seeing him avoid those. And I think that's really important in a game like this, because I think that Alabama can get their hands on some turnovers. I understand Carson Beck doesn't turn the football over a lot, but I think that if they can apply pressure on him, make him uncomfortable in a hostile environment, Bryant-Denny Stadium at night, you've got that vision-oriented defense, Keon Sabb playing that robber role kind of underneath, breaking on some of those short to intermediate routes that Carson Beck's going to be throwing. He hadn't really worked too much over the middle of the field. I don't know how much he will in this particular game. He did it a lot more last year. He's kind of gotten away from it. But, I think that Alabama can get their hands on at least one turnover and potentially two. Alabama's got to make that an advantage at home by also not turning the football over. What's got you nervous, Chris? You got a nervous look on your face.
Georgia hasn't had a turnover all year.
Okay. Do you think that's going to continue all year?
No, I don't. I would.
Okay, so it's going to turn at some point.
I would be shocked. I think that's a good point.
Have we ever seen that?
It is. It's also it's also one of the things that has played out to be true in this game is the stuff that we think we know and the stuff that we hear from that fan base and that media group especially, because it's like, dude, I feel like I get it because they're just 15 years behind what we've all experienced. Like, it's fun at the start of like a dynasty and winning national championships and like for the first time in a while, and like I get it. But the stuff that they're doing, like statistically, it's impressive. But, I remember that 2021 game, it was like, well, they're only giving up exactly 6.9 points per game so far, which is nice. And Bama puts up 41. Last year, you're talking about like they were the best offense. They were the best third down offense in the country at over 55%. They went 4 of 12. They lost the turnover battle last year, and they did it in a key spot too, Clint. That's the other thing. Is like, it's one thing to air it out, throw a 40, 50-yard bomb, and it gets picked. That's basically a punt. But if they do something stupid and Bama can flip the field, because this is one of the first times in a long time that Bama is even or better than them in special teams. Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about with like the back-breaking turnovers from Jalen Milroe. Like, a lot of his stuff last year, against Texas, the timing of that was terrible. The second one, it's like Alabama had started to capture some momentum. You get that second turnover. Texas now stacks drives, is able to kind of create some separation, and Alabama was never able to recover against Ole Miss. You're in scoring position in the first half, and you throw a terrible interception in the red zone. Like, that's 3 points guaranteed gone, potentially
like a penalty 7 or two penalties back to back. We're only at the 1 yard line, and then next thing you know,
over the head. They snapped it over the head, I believe. It was terrible. So I'm not saying that was necessarily. I'm saying examples of like turnovers you can't have. Georgia had one of those. Carson Beck had one of those last year, and I'm not saying that it's going to be those back-breaking turnovers for Alabama's defense, but I think they can get one, potentially two. And I think that, they've got to just continue to maintain not turning the football, not giving Georgia added opportunities, not letting don't deflate the crowd. That whole thing, I think that's really important. And then, you were talking about Justice Haynes. I would love for this to be a big game for him. I think he's been getting kind of knocked a little unfairly by people, relative to Jam. Jam's been having a lot of success, but it's like I mentioned yesterday on the live show that we did. A lot of Jam's success is kind of the pin and pull outside zone, get him in space, let him break some tackles. He's very good at that kind of stuff. Justice can certainly do some of that as well. Both of these guys are more complete backs. Just I think one's a little bit stronger in one area and the other's a little bit stronger in the other. And I think Justice Haynes is more of like a split zone inside between the tackles runner. That's probably where he's at his best. And the problem with that is, like against USF, limited opportunities on that front because Tyler Booker kicks out to left tackle. So your elite guard goes from being an interior guy to, a good left tackle. You bring in Geno Vandermark, who I've said multiple times, he held up well in pass protection, but I didn't feel like he did a great job run blocking. Again, I just feel like with the offensive line against Wisconsin, getting Caden Proctor back, getting Elijah Pritchett back, getting the interior back in the spots where they've been playing or were expecting to play, you still only got 2 carries for Justice Haynes. He had success on those carries, but that was just kind of the way that things worked out. When you're doing zone reads, you're doing RPOs. Sometimes it's just on the plays that you're in. That's the ones that they end up popping for the other guy, and just the defense shows, a keep if it's a zone read, or a pull and throw on a RPO, things like that. So I just think that's the way it worked out. I could totally see Alabama, this being kind of a breakout game in some ways. I think the breakout game was Michigan last year in the Rose Bowl, but as far as being a starter, he's been Alabama's starter in all 3 games. We kind of forget that. Even though Jam Miller's been performing extremely well, Justice has been the first guy to jog out there with the first team offense, and he's the younger player. So I think that probably tells you something about what the staff thinks about. They're both really, really good players. So I would expect Justice Haynes to have a big game. You got anything on that before we talk real quick about the defense?
No, I would prefer to talk about the defense, because I would like to get, like, that's where I'm like, I feel like I'm least confident right now.
Really? Okay. Now, why is that? Just
like there's not a factual reason, because I started looking at the numbers, Clint, and like you look at what, I think one of the numbers I pulled out was like, I think Georgia has allowed 2 total plays to go over 20 yards all season. They've only had 2 plays over 20 yards they've allowed all season. Bama's had 3. Like Bama, it's a different looking Bama defense. Like, they're not going to get to the quarterback as much, especially against Georgia, but they are opportunistic. We cannot give up 4 and 5 yards a carry up front in the run game. That's the thing that I'm most concerned about, because, and it's not even with Trevor Etienne, because I think Frazier is probably going to have a better game than him anyway, but you cannot get in a situation where you're having to stack the box and then let Carson Beck be able to get play action and have some more creative stuff from Mike Bobo.
Yeah. I mean, I think stopping the run is really important. That's why, Quayru saw him being probable for this game. And granted, probable doesn't mean guaranteed that he's going to play. He can get downgraded and not play, but I think it was encouraging that he wasn't questionable. I don't know why you would list him probable if he wasn't, really trending in that direction for playing. And then, obviously setbacks can happen, but I think he's in a good spot, and I think he does end up playing. And I just think that's really important as far as Georgia's kind of exterior run game. The fact that he's going to be playing that Wolf spot, playing out there on the edge, some good edge setter, very physical. I think having that type of presence, I like Keanu Coote. I like, Quandarius Robinson. I think they're both good players, especially Robinson. Jan Zapier has been providing some pretty good snaps, or provided some pretty good snaps against Wisconsin. But, Quayru Saul, he's still a young guy. I still think you're going to see the occasional mistakes, but I just think what he offers that position is just it's not something that can be replicated by any of the other guys. So stopping their run game, I think, is really important. Putting as much pressure, from a down and distance perspective, allowing your pass rush to tee off on Carson Beck a little bit. I think that's where the turnovers start to happen. Earn the right to get after the quarterback, and then it might not be a sack. It could be a strip sack. That'd be a turnover. But I think more so just getting Carson Beck under duress, maybe, making him escape. And now he's trying to throw on the move. And, he's not terrible on that front. But he just, in an environment and the pressure of this type of game, you've got a defense that has proven already they've got some guys that are very opportunistic. And, there's been even more opportunities for turnovers than Alabama's gotten. I mean, once in each of the last 3 games, the first 3 games of the year, dropped interception by, I think it was Deontay Lawson first. Then it was Jahad Campbell the next week against USF. And then it was Keon Sabb against Wisconsin. He should have 3 interceptions in 3 games at this point. Yeah. So, got to bring in the football because those types of plays are going to make that much more of a difference in this game than in any other game you've played. But, I think that's really important. And Tate Ratledge being out, man. I mean, is that not huge?
Have to kind of go through what we've gone through finally. Like, they're going to have some injuries.
Yeah. And I don't think their tackle with Ernest Green is a really good player. I think Xavier Truss has been, a serviceable tackle. Monroe Freeling is kind of like their, I guess I would call him their Wilkin Formby, right. Even though, obviously it's been those other 2 guys, but he's gotten some chances and they're trying to groom him to eventually take over one of those spots. But I just don't think they've been as effective with their tackles as I kind of was expecting. I think they've kind of, the placement up and down and the interior, especially after losing Tate Ratledge. I mean, I think that's an area where Alabama can win. And, and that's where I think a guy like Tim Keenan, like him stopping the run, the interior run, if they try to be balanced, the inside out stuff, a guy like Tim Keenan is going to play a really big part in that. But, for him and for some of those other interior guys, it's kind of them pushing the pocket and really, collapsing things on Carson Beck. Same thing, that I was talking about, making him escape the pocket and make plays on the move consistently. Can he do it consistently? I feel pretty good about Alabama's defensive front. They've been susceptible to giving up, some runs. And I understand anybody that's concerned about the run game. You got to, gap responsibility is huge. You've seen confusion. I was actually going back to watch. I was actually shocked. I mean, when you start looking at gap responsibility, there were some plays against USF. There were some plays against Wisconsin where it's like, okay, who's got this gap? Because it's completely left uncovered. So you don't know responsibilities all the time and stuff. You think, but I think they're still getting used to that shallow off-ball linebacker with the Wolves and gap responsibilities and all those things. But at the same time, I think they've now had 2 more weeks to get more comfortable with that. I think they should be. And I think that should really help as far as Georgia's run game. Try to put as much on Carson Beck's shoulders as possible. He's a good player, got a good, a good sound, football mind. Not saying it's going to overwhelm him by any means, but I just think it could be enough to make him make 1 or 2 key mistakes.
I don't disagree with that. I will say his career against ranked opponents, he's got a total of 14 touchdowns, only 1 interception.
Yes.
So he's been consistent and like, he's not a game manager. Like he is, I don't know how many touchdowns he's going to put up each week, because sometimes they don't need him to, but he is going to go out there and complete 67 to 72% of his passes and throw for 280 every single game. Like that's just what he does as a starter. But here's the one thing here's the one thing I will absolutely overreact to negatively about Georgia from this year. And that is, it's great that what we saw in week 1 against Clemson, they overmatched and just dismantled Clemson. And here's the thing, maybe we don't talk enough about that game. Like I think that Kentucky game made everyone a prisoner of the moment for whatever reason. And just forgot about the fact that they killed Clemson 2 weeks prior. And now you look at what Clemson's done since then, and they become like an offensive juggernaut. They have the highest first quarter scoring offense in the country. Cade Klubnik at one point last week had 12 straight drives that ended in a touchdown for that Clemson offense when he was at QB. But anyway, it's like, I wouldn't hang too much on the Kentucky game versus Clemson. One thing I did see against Kentucky that is very like uncharacteristic of this team, nobody had a killer instinct. It didn't seem like anybody was going to pick them up and be like the guy to get shit started in the right direction. Like they didn't have a Brock Bowers. Like you look at the last 2 games that Bama's beat Georgia in, Brock Bowers combined for 15 receptions for over 200 yards. He's gone. Oscar Delp, I thought was going to be a lot better. He has not done much this year so far. And I feel like Delp had a fumble late that could have gone the other way for Kentucky. Kentucky's one of the worst teams in the conference. Like they just because they played them close does not mean they're a good team. They're one
Are
of
you
the
saying that
worst.
because you watched South Carolina destroy him?
I absolutely am. I absolutely am. Like, listen, Brock Vandagriff is not great. That offensive line, they ran the football well against Georgia, so that gives me hope for Bama. But like, they don't pose any kind of threat offensively to have won that game. The fact that it took that long for Georgia to get their shit together and try to come out and get a win, like that is concerning. And you saw Kirby, how his frustration late in that game, which was like, screaming at people like to focus and settle in. You don't have a Nakobe Dean. You don't have a Jordan Davis. Like, I think Jalen Walker's great. I don't know if he's a leader in that locker room. Malachi Starks is great. I don't know if he's a leader in that locker room. Like, and Carson Beck is great. I don't think he's a real vocal guy. So what happens if they are down? Or what happens if they need somebody to pull them in, to come from behind late? Like, I don't know if they have that guy because Kirby can't suit up and get on the actual field as much as he wants to. Like, he is not going to go put a helmet on and get out there on the field.
Well, I mean, and you look at like what's the worst environment that Carson Beck's had to play in, would you say?
Probably the Instagram comments from the Cavender twins.
Okay. I mean, I honestly, I don't. I honestly,
I'm right.
I mean, you actually could be right, but I'm okay. So What's
the worst environment he's played in? Like on the road?
Auburn,
probably.
Honestly,
it's a bad Auburn team.
Yeah, and I mean, he struggled, and Georgia struggled. Now, granted, here's the thing: this is why you can't get too carried away with the Kentucky game. Once again, already said this, but for the people that didn't see yesterday's show, you had Auburn last year go on the road 27-20. You had, what was it, South Carolina last year. I want to say that was like like
it was 14-10 at the half. I think they won 24-14.
Yes, and that was at home. It was a 10-point win, but they really struggled. You look at Missouri the year before, 26-22. You look at Kentucky.
That Malachi Starks had a tackle at the 1 yard line on whoever their running back was. If he doesn't tackle him at the 1 and they hold him to a field goal, they lose that game.
Yeah, and you also had Kentucky that year before too in 2022, and I think they might have won that game by 10 points or something like that. No, maybe it wasn't Kentucky. I'm trying to remember who it was. No, yeah, it was.
No, Kentucky in 2021 was
2022. It was 16-6, and that was a road game at Kentucky. But here's the thing about all three of those: you had like a 6-7, a 6-7, a 6-7, and a 7-6. So these are all like barely under 500, or one of these teams just over 500, and they really struggled against all four. I mean, 16-6. I mean, that sounds a lot like 13-12, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 10-point win compared to 1. I get it, but it's like 16 points. That's terrible. So my point is that you've seen Georgia in these types of situations, and it hadn't affected them, when you play in Alabama or you play one of these big time opponents, because it's, they're 28-1 over the last 2 seasons. So
right.
who cares who they're struggling against? But my point though is we have not seen like a Carson Beck in any type of environment that I can recall. Maybe someone can correct me. Going into Jordan-Hare Stadium, that is a tough place to play. Alabama has certainly learned that the last 2 times they've been there. But, we haven't seen Carson Beck in this type of environment. So we'll see how he ends up performing. But if he gets through this and he manages this game well and he doesn't turn the football over, I think that will speak volumes about him. He kind of will be the guy that everybody thinks that he is. And I think that he is that guy. I just think that those guys are also capable of occasionally making some mental hiccups. And I think Alabama can take advantage of some of that.
Here's a stat for you. All right. They played, this is in road games last year. He had 6 interceptions on the season, right? 6 total. I'm not going to count the Ball State one because it's Ball State. So he had 5 against FBS opponents. 3 of them came on the road. He went and by the way, he had 24 touchdowns. Like you look at like once they got into the actual like that South Carolina game, he had 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Once he got into actual SEC play and like conference play, he had 16 total touchdowns in those 8 games. On the road, outside of that Tennessee game where he had 3 and 0 interceptions, you talk about at Auburn, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Vanderbilt, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Georgia Tech, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Also, his lowest rated or passer rating games of the season. Wasn't great from a completion percentage standpoint. Like in some of those, like the yards per attempt, I'm looking at Vandy, 6.7 yards per attempt. Like, here's the one thing I know. I don't know if he's going to struggle being on the road. I think you're right. Like, he hasn't been in an environment like this. I don't give a shit about Jordan Hare and Auburn Jesus and the voodoo and all that kind of stuff. One thing I do know, I don't know how loud Jordan Hare got last year for him, but I do know that once he had the ball, like, or once Auburn had the ball, when he was looking across the sideline, Peyton Thorne was taking snaps for Auburn. I can't name a receiver they had from last year. That's not this team. Like, that's not who he's playing on Saturday.
The pressure. He never faced a lot of pressure from the other side. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Like in this type of game, you're terrified to make a mistake because, you know, that could be in these types of games. Everything matters more. Everything's magnified. It could be a very low scoring game. If you turn the football over in your own territory, like he did last year, and that results in a touchdown or a field goal, that could help create a little bit of separation that's very difficult to overcome. So, I mean, you know, they play Clemson and he plays well against Clemson in week 1, but that's essentially a home game for Georgia, right? So, yeah. I mean, it just and
Clemson doesn't pose any of the same kind of threats that Bama's going to pose in general, but especially offensively. Like they just don't.
And I love that you looked at that stat about, you know, the road performances, because that's going to be any quarterback to an extent. You know, it's easier to play at home than it is away. It's easier to play against easier opponents than it is, you know, top 10 opponents. You know, like Jalen Milroe has not looked at his best. He didn't against Texas last year. He didn't against Michigan, and he didn't against Georgia. I think late against Georgia, he really started to get some stuff going. I thought he was really close. Going back to watch him again, I thought he was really, really close on a couple. There was one in like the corner of the end zone. I think it was Isaiah Bond, but I can't remember who the receiver was. But in that SEC championship, where it was a incredible pass in my opinion, but just couldn't quite connect. So I'm not saying it was just downright awful by any means, but I just don't think that he played his best football. But that's also that's college football playoff caliber opponents. I mean. Right. And so you expect him to not play as well, but he did enough to get the job done. And so with Carson Beck, I'm definitely, you know, I like Carson Beck. I think he's going to be a good player. If this was in Athens, I would very much lean Carson Beck having the better performance than Jalen Milroe. I would. With this being in Tuscaloosa, I think that it's going to be a lot more difficult for Beck to have a high quality performance than it will be Jalen Milroe. So we'll see how that turns out. But, you know, I think that there's a lot working in Alabama's favor. Mm-hmm. That does not mean I am kind of worried, because a lot of it does look really good on paper, and you do have the betting line moving in Alabama's favor. So now Georgia, you know, is now quote unquote the underdog. And, you know, I will say there is a lot of people picking Alabama. There are plenty picking Georgia. Don't get me wrong. But there are a lot of people picking Alabama. That, to me, that is the most worrisome part of all of this, is just what kind of motivational, you know, factors that can play into Georgia's favor. But I guess we'll see how it works out, man. I feel good about Alabama.
It's stupid. Like if they need, dude, I think one of the dumbest things I've seen all week, and I love Graham Coffey to death. He's one of my friends in real life. But that whole thing that him and a bunch of the media did this week of like, dude, did you guys, like, we asked about, you know, has the quote from Jalen Milroe made it around the locker room that, you know, he said y'all quit last year? Like what are your thoughts? How about this? How about you answer the question of why y'all quit? Because you did. Like, they beat you into submission. Like, I just.
Well, I will say later in his career, and this is why Nick Saban did this. It was Alabama had very few external factors that could create motivation.
Right.
So Nick Saban really later on started to adopt this philosophy of you've got to create your own internal motivation. You can't let external factors be what motivates you. It was never really spoken early in his career, but one thing you knew is if you beat Alabama, the revenge factor, you were catching an ass whipping next time you played Alabama. There was no doubt. And that wasn't a coincidence. That was extra motivation wanting to right a ship.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for everybody, you can say, oh, I mean, you shouldn't let the external factors be what motivates you, say all the right things. I totally get it. But, it really can. You can feel disrespect. I mean, Georgia turned everybody. He was acting like people were predicting them they were going to go 6-6 a couple of years ago.
I coined the phrase and I made stickers and stuff for it 2 years ago. Horny for disrespect. I have never seen a fan base from top to bottom, and not even just the
Dabo tried. Dabo tried. Little old Clemson.
The absolute horny for disrespect of like, oh, no one thinks we can do it. You're favored in every game. No one said that you were going to go 7-5. That is the weirdest gaslighting yourself into belief. Like, what are we talking about here? And then, like, dude, it's one thing to have some sort of like motivation like that in the locker room, but then to convince your dumbass fan base that everyone was saying it, like, no, you just won a national championship. You returned to everyone, and everyone said that you were going to go 7-5. Like, shut.
I mean, you're right, but I will say that there's no one's saying Alabama's going to blow them out of the water. I mean, a lot of people are picking Georgia. I don't know what the number is. I would probably say, I mean, honestly, if I'm speaking candidly from what I've seen, it kind of feels like a 55-45 people picking Alabama. Maybe I'm just, hearing from the wrong people.
Yeah.
But and it's like you go from being the favorite to everybody's betting against you. Now you're quote unquote the dog. I mean, that's not something that you really got to make up. That's something that Kirby can use. And I don't know if he will. I don't know to what extent it will be, how effective it will be. I will say, based off of the way that Alabama's offensive line pushed their defensive line around last year, I would expect their defensive line to be pretty motivated. And that doesn't mean that they're going to whip up on Alabama's offensive line. It could be the exact same result. I think this is a really good run blocking offensive line. And I think they're figuring some things out with the pass protection too. But just, understand that there's going to be some guys, at least, some individual players who are going to be playing with a chip on their shoulder. And, but that's also said for Alabama. Like, they kind of, because Nick Saban retired, everybody kind of wrote Alabama off. They're trying to prove that they're every bit of what they've been, so that's a motivating factor too. And I think that continues to carry on, and getting a win against Georgia, against big bad Georgia with big bad Kirby Smart now that Nick Saban's retired, that's a statement. So, I think there's motivational factors on both sides. I don't want to say it's just Georgia, but it's just because you don't know what's working to what degree on that front. So a team can come in, and it's the problem with bowl games. Like you don't know who's really motivated and wants to be there, wants to be doing it. So you can look at the X's and O's all you want, but it's different. Anything else before we hop out of here, brother?
I would like to say a few words, and I want to ask you one.
A few?
Am I allowed to cuss? I'm going to drop the F-bomb.
Okay.
It'll be in good.
No, I'm sure. I just, I'm an F-bomb guy, but I don't really know. This is the part of the video where if you don't want
to do it,
I
don't care. I'm fired.
Go ahead and cut it off. I mean,
you've turned my I think uncertainty and insecurities about this game around a lot. And the more we've talked about it, the better I feel about it. I don't love that everyone's picking Bama for the most part, and I think that Georgia is really good. And I
don't go from concerned to cocky. Let's not do that.
No, I'm not. But I do want to say one thing, and I feel like I say it. I only get to say it a couple times a year because there are very few games every year where Bama has to get up and go win a big matchup. That's like the the curse and the benefit of being a Bama fan since the Nick Saban era started, because the Arkansas games don't matter anymore, right? Like I don't have to worry about watching Ole Miss at Jefferson Pilot and squeak out a 3-point win. But here's what I do want to say. I've been part of the problem with gassing up Georgia and how great they are, because I think they are the premier program in the country as of right now. And a lot of that's on paper. They won 2 national championships in the last 3 years. They've only lost 2 games. You can sit here all you want if you're a Georgia fan and say, well, yeah, they didn't lose to Alabama. They lost to Nick Saban. Sure. They are a really, really good team. If there's anything else I know about Georgia, it is also that the moment things get really tough against this opponent is usually the moment they roll over and die. And that's not something they do against anyone else, but they do it against Bama every single time. So when you get into that stadium, if you're a fan going to the game, have a blast, have fun, be safe, all that good stuff. You better be on your feet and loud as hell the entire 60 fucking minutes. Make that place miserable. We get it like so much disrespect and dismissive reactions about how good of a home environment Bryant-Denny Stadium can be. Put that shit to rest immediately on Saturday for the entire duration of the game. And the other thing I have to say is this: all the fans, Georgia fans, like their players, like stuff in the media that you've heard this week about quitting and how they have a message they want to send. You can talk all the shit you want all off season. You can take all the screenshots of bad holding calls and bad calls from the refs. There's the only fan base I know that puts together art collages after they lose, explaining why they should have won. You can do all that shit you want every offseason, on every message board, on every social media platform, whatever. But at 7:30 on Saturday night,
6:30,
they are going to tee up that fucking ball, and you're going to have to line up and play Alabama. And I know there's a new head coach, but there is an army of 5 stars and elite talent on that field that is just ready to be the next in line to do what Bama has done for the last 15 to 20 years. And that is go out there and dominate and make their ass quit. So, buddy, I am fired up.
I'm fired up too. You've got me fired up. I'm glad that we waited to have this conversation until Friday, because if there was 48 hours on this thing left to go, I don't know that I could stand it. I'm ready. You know what? Let's get everybody over there right now. Let's just go ahead and kick it off. I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah,
dude, this has been a lot of fun. Great conversation. Well, way longer than we were expecting. I think sometimes we just let these things carry us, but I just feel like it was a healthy conversation, kind of wrapping up some of the thoughts that has already been shared. I really wanted to get your thoughts on this game, and we've certainly done that. I hope people have enjoyed it. If you haven't liked this video already, go give us a like. Go give us, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's really important for us. We're trying to get those numbers built up. Turn on that notification bell. We're going to be having a lot of content post game video going on. Mick Gillespie, he's going to be kind of running the entire thing, but I'll be hopping on there. Maybe we'll get Chris to call in, whether it's good or bad. Maybe we can get you, 5-10 minutes from you, let you overreact one way or another, whether it's, a little trash talking or whether it's what went wrong. But we have a lot of fun with the post game stuff. We're going to be doing a video on Sunday. We're going to be switching up the schedule a little bit next week, changing some things up. We've been kind of playing around with some different things, and we think we've got something that we really want to try and do. And then if you haven't already, go subscribe at covercrimson.com. It's only $1 for the first month. Going to be, we've already got some content over there covering this game, going in depth. I did a thing on the running backs and just, what Jam does well, what Justice does well. I broke down every single run that both players have had this season. I explained some things as far as gaps and all. I went in depth about the running backs so people could understand a lot of that stuff going on. We're going to have more. The game day thread, I guarantee you it was going to be jumping. A lot of great conversations. So go subscribe if you haven't already. And Chris, brother, as always, I appreciate you, and we will have to do this again soon.
Sounds good, dude. I'll see you next week.